Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Desiree Futel. I'm a board member with the League of Women Voters of the Cincinnati area, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's event, and thank you for coming out. I want to congratulate you for coming and becoming educated about this issue. I'd like to also point out that today, April 4th, it is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King worked hard to ensure the right to vote and was convinced of the power at the ballot box. Encouraging people to exercise their hard-won right to vote and fighting for a fair system where every vote counts equally and is very appropriate way to honor Dr. King's legacy. At 7 p.m. this evening, we will be taking a moment of silence to recognize him. This evening's program is sponsored jointly by the League of Women Voters and Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated is the first Greek letter organization founded on the campus of Howard University for African American women on January 15, 1908, and has a legacy for service to all mankind for nearly 110 years. Alpha Kappa Alpha advocates to protect voting rights, provides voter registration outreach, and participates in get out the vote efforts. Sorority members aim to be the voice for their families, be the voice for their communities, and for their state and voters across the nation. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920 by the suffragists after they succeeded their fight to win women the right to vote. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages informed and active participation in government. It influences public policy through education and advocacy. Being nonpartisan means that we never support or oppose any political party or candidate, but we do advocate for policy issues and have taken a strong position in support of issue 1 on the ballot. The League has worked for years, not just years, but decades, to end gerrymandering in Ohio. We are excited to be so close to this goal. This evening's program is part of our League's advocacy. We also have voter information at the tables outside about the other local issues on the May's ballot and updating your voter information, so please see someone outside. Let me now introduce our primary speaker, Ms. Catherine Terser. Ms. Terser is the Executive Director of Ohio Common Cause. Common Cause and the League of Women Voters are two statewide organizations that began the Citizens Initiative petition to end gerrymandering of congressional districts in Ohio. As a leader of Fair Districts, Fair Elections, she has crisscrossed the state speaking to innumerable groups. We are grateful that she has come down from Columbus to speak with us. Catherine Terser is our champion in slaying the fierce gerrymander.
So how many of you out here are voters? Okay, all right, looks like a cool crowd that I'm going to enjoy talking to. How many of you out here are performers? Okay, just so many hands. Hello, everyone. So one of the things, as we think about, it's been 50 years since Martin Luther King Jr. passed away. I think it's really important for us to take that moment and to think about what it means to fight for fair elections. Many of you here are part of the League of Women Voters of Ohio who have advocated for years and years for fair elections. And the story about slaying the gerrymander is a story about us deserving better elections. That in fact, fair districts equal fair elections. I'm supposed to move back? Why do I have one attached to me? Oh. Did y'all have trouble hearing me? Okay. All right, we'll start again. How many of you were voters? No. So apparently I may have crossed the state of Ohio from Lake Erie to the Ohio River, but I'm not smart enough to know how to use the mic. So I'm so glad that so many of you are here. I was so glad to see everyone's hand of age raising it and saying that they're voters. And, you know, it is really a good moment for us all to pause, to appreciate, you know, the story of redistricting reformers, that we're all about making sure that elections are fair. And on this evening, as we consider the life of Martin Luther King Jr., and we take a pause, we need to think about how we can carry that legacy forward and promote fair elections. And our tale of trying to slay the gerrymander is a tale of trying to empower voters. And so I picked this picture for the slideshow. On the what will be your left, my stage right, you'll see this is Brittany, who's with Common Cause Ohio. And on the other side, we have Steve Dyer, who was a state rep for many years and works on education policy. And I just appreciated that, you know, anyone is willing to wear these crazy hats, right? And one of the things that I have appreciated the most about all the redistricting reform work is how people were willing to try to have fun. So first of all, I thought, hey, let's take a pause, let's look back, let's look at what the gerrymander is. Because for many of us, we're really familiar, but for others, we're just not really aware exactly what the gerrymander is. We know it's a manipulation of districts, but I thought we'd take a pause. So this is the original gerrymander. Now what's really crazy about this is a political cartoon from 1812. A political cartoon from 1812. So we know that our founding fathers got a few things wrong. 3/5 of a man, shall we go into that? Women didn't have the vote. I mean, you start to think about all the things they got wrong, but what's really important to think about is, in fact, this gerrymander. It is a cartoon that was in the Boston Gazette in 1812, as I said, and the Jerry of the gerrymander was this guy named Elbridge Gerry. You know how everybody's name gets changed over time? So the thing that's interesting about Elbridge Gerry, he signed the Declaration of Independence. He was an advocate for the Bill of Rights. And yet, when it came time to actually think about the voters, what he did is he thought of his political party before he worried about his voters having a really good election. And that led to this crazy district shape, and it set the stage for all sorts of weird districts here in Ohio, but all across the country. And so as we think about how difficult it has been to actually address gerrymandering, we need to remember that this was something that was embedded at the beginning. And we need to think about what it means actually to be here talking about how we passed state legislative redistricting reform, and now we're on to congressional redistricting reform. So I would like to take a moment. This is actually from Ben and Jerry. And so Ben and Jerry were these wonderful guys. Anybody like their ice cream? Oh yeah, I see a hand back there. So the thing that's wonderful about this is that they have this thing, Ben and Jerry care about money and politics, but they also care about gerrymandering. And since his name is Jerry, he also thought it was really fun to do this contest where what you would do is you would look at a shape and you would decide whether it was a Rorschach ink blot or you would decide it was, in fact, a district, and you had to decide. And so this one is Maryland's 3rd Congressional District, which, right? Who wouldn't have guessed that was a Rorschach ink blot, right? It's symmetrical. It doesn't, and this is, in fact, the district. In fact, it's quite impressive. This is a gerrymander by Democrats. It's the gerrymander that actually made its way all the way last week to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, we can talk about all these weird shaped districts. We have the gerrymander. We have, in this particular case, a district that starts all the way over here in Toledo, Lucas County, and works its way along the Ohio River all the way to Cleveland. Toledo to Cleveland. 9th Congressional District. Oh, you're absolutely right. Can we rerun the tape? I'll do better next time, I swear. So one of the things that we always misspeak, so please, if I say it not completely clearly, just let me know. So you're absolutely right. We're along the lake. No, we're along the river. This is along the lake. And the thing that's really interesting to think about is, why would you do a crazy district like this? Why would it look like this? So in 2011, the Republicans were in charge of map making. And what happened is they had we had fewer districts because we had reduced population. And so what they wanted to do is put 2 members of Congress together. In this particular case, 2 Democratic members of Congress together. One, Marcy Kucinich, who is now the longest serving member of Congress that's a woman, right? And the other one, all the way over here, was a guy named Dennis Kucinich, who's now running for governor. And it was a way to make it so that they would reduce the number of Democrats, literally eliminating one of them. Now we have the Duck District. This is Jim Jordan's district, and I always like to kind of draw attention to this because it starts kind of near Oberlin, and it works its way along like this, and then it shakes its tail feathers over here in Mercer County, which is north of you. That's just a bag of crazy, isn't it? From Cleveland to near the Indiana border. And then let's just take a moment to look overall. I'm guessing that you all are familiar with the districts in your neck of the woods. So, my mother always said that pretty is as pretty does, right? Ultimately, if it's ugly, it's not a big deal. That's not the problem. The problem is that they're unfair. The problem is that we do not have competitive elections. And in fact, we know that we don't have any competitive elections because last time we had an election, which was in 2016, the average margin of victory for our members of Congress, 36 points. Competitive is 5. So 36 points, completely uncompetitive. The other thing that's really interesting is we had Democratic districts, they tilt towards the Democrats. We have Republican districts, they tilt towards the Republicans. Every single election, Democratic districts elected a Democrat, and Republican districts elected a Republican. And this looks like a tedious chart, but the way to look at this is the party projected to win. And this projection is from the map makers because we were able to use public records to actually get what they projected. And this is what they projected. So red, Republicans, blue, Democrats, meaning the map makers had more to say in many ways about who got elected than we do. This is not what democracy looks like, right? It's not right, it's not fair. Now, I did want to draw your attention to this, that yes, this is the case in Ohio, that in fact, in Ohio, one party was marginalized over the other, uncompetitive races, but that in fact this is a trend, and so as you look at this, you have Ohio, this is Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. And so as you look at this, you get the sense of what are traditional swing states sending, shall we say, an inordinate number of Republicans to Washington. Now, the thing to remember is, once again, gerrymandering is a tool of whichever party is in power, but it disempowers us, the voters. And so, it's that kind of thing, like, we would never let whoever won the Super Bowl make a decision that, in fact, these are the rules of the game. This is where the post should be. This is how easy it should be. Let's pick the referees. We would never allow that because it wouldn't be fair. And yet, because we give the map making to one political party, what we can end up with so easily are truly uncompetitive elections across the country. And one of the things that I think, as we think about what this actually means, is we call ourselves the Fair Districts Fair Elections Coalition, but it's actually the Fair Districts Equal Fair Elections Coalition. So think of it this way. Manipulated districts manipulate the election, which manipulates the policy that's made in Washington. And why is it so much easier to manipulate than it was just a few years ago? Any guesses out there? Big data, computers, that now you can completely marginalize the party that's out of power. Elbridge Gerry might actually have wanted to draw the snake on the lake. He might have wanted to do that, but he wouldn't have had the tools at his disposal to do it. Now, one of the things that we do know that's actually kind of interesting is that gerrymandering has started to filter into lots of different conversations, right? We literally had it on Saturday Night Live, right? Okay, so I love this. So this is the notorious RGB, showing off the districts from Wisconsin, where she described the Democrats as getting the big smelly cheese of democracy. And for many of us, we've kind of wondered, okay, so we know that this is the manipulation of the vote. Well, why is it legal, right? Well, why is it actually constitutional? It doesn't actually make any sense that it would be constitutional to do this. And so there are a couple different things that have been going on at the U.S. Supreme Court, and I know you're all here for issue 1, but it's important to kind of pay attention to what they're doing as well. We have neighbors to this, all around us that also struggle with this situation. So years ago, in 1962, there was a decision called Baker versus Carr, which was one of the first decisions that the U.S. Supreme Court made where they got into what they called the political thicket. Before that, they were pretty much saying, okay, we just want to let the legislature do their thing. But what had happened is that the size of the districts had gotten so out of whack that, in fact, they stepped in and they said, one man, one vote. We would now say one person, one vote, and it's the reason that the districts are equal in population because of that decision. But they have not stepped in. They've stepped in for racial gerrymandering, but they have not stepped in for partisan gerrymandering. And that's had some real consequences, like the elections that we've had in Ohio. So the Supreme Court recently heard 2 different cases. One, a Republican gerrymander from Wisconsin, and one, a Democratic gerrymander from Maryland. And the thing that's kind of interesting about this whole thing is that at the end of the day, there was even a discussion about hearing a third case. They have been very slow to step in because they're worried about looking as if they are partisan rather than the situation. And so we will have to see what actually happens with this, with this case. One case, which is the Wisconsin one, argued that, in fact, gerrymandering was a violation of equal protection, that, in fact, it treated voters differently. So since it treated voters differently, it was equal protection. The Maryland case argued that, hey, it's a violation of our First Amendment rights. Both of them are interesting legal arguments, but at the end of the day, we just want to participate in elections that are actually meaningful. So I threw this up here. How many of you worked on redistricting reform in 1981? Okay, now think about this. Okay, I wasn't even in high school, right? 1981. So the League of Women Voters have been working on redistricting reform for many years. And it's important to think, yes, you have a long history of working on voting rights, but to think about, in 1981, the League of Women Voters worked extremely hard to collect signatures so that it would be on the ballot. This was a reform measure that focused on keeping communities together, it would focus on compactness, and the Republican Party was all about it because they were marginalized, much like the Democrats are now. So unfortunately, the unions and the Democrats fought it back in 1981. League of Women Voters, they are like mosquitoes. They will not stop. They will get you to pay attention to them. And so what happened is, Joan Lawrence kept introducing year after year at the State House resolutions. In the late 90s, the League of Women Voters attempted another signature gathering campaign that did not come to fruition, because I don't know about you guys, direct democracy is hard. How many of you were out there collecting signatures? Direct democracy is hard. And so, the tale is, we get to 2005, Democrats are tired of being marginalized. This is the time period of CoinGate. And what happened is, they said, this is a perfect time to focus on, we're going to focus on early vote, we're going to focus on campaign finance reform, we're going to focus on redistricting reform. And we lost again. We did get 30 days of early vote because the legislature decided to do legislation. So we should remember that campaign fondly because it got us early vote. Because they thought, okay, that's one that's really popular, it's going to kick the legs out, it'll make it easy for them to lose. So, 2006 was interesting. Because that was the point that John Husted came along. He said, I said to the editorial boards that gerrymandering was wrong. I'm going to keep advocating for this. And he kept advocating for it. A number of other folks kept advocating for it. But as you know, we just couldn't seem to get it done legislatively. And it wasn't until we finally lost again in 2012. How many here collected signatures in 2012? It wasn't until after we'd had a few bites of the apple and changed the conversation and really let people know exactly what's going on. One of the things that we should all feel really proud of is how well we have managed to educate people about an unfairness that literally happens every 10 years behind closed doors and involves somebody hanging out with a computer. That in fact, we now really understand gerrymandering is a testament to your hard work. So I wanted to highlight once again, when you're the party out of power, gerrymandering looks wildly undemocratic. And in fact, this is what Reagan said about California, because of course the Democrats were in power. He said, that's all we're asking for, an end to the undemocratic and un-American practice of gerrymandering. The fact is, gerrymandering has become a national scandal. Did you all look at the date on this? 1987. How about this one? Anybody here know Jim Rhodes? Know that name? Okay. So Jim Rhodes, during the 1981 era, actually sent a letter to a guy named Benson Woolman, who was at that point with the ACLU. And this was what he said in the letter, which I found in our archives just a little while ago, which was kind of fun. Gerrymandering is not a Republican or Democrat problem. It is a fundamental problem of government that must be corrected. And this was from a letter from 1981. Let's take a moment to pause. As we think about, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., many of us feel like, well, there's no way I can't even envision being that inspiring. I can't even envision what that would be. And I have to say, during 2017, I met so many people that were a true inspiration, that truly were inspiring, and really took that idea that we are the leaders that we have been waiting for, that we are the leaders that we've been waiting for. I'm going to pick up my clipboard. I am going to change democracy. I'm going to make things fairer for all of us. And, here you have, people from all over Ohio who collected signatures. It is, it's been truly inspiring to think about people saying, I am worried, but as opposed to wringing my hands, what I am going to do is I'm going to pick up a clipboard and I'm going to talk to voters and I'm going to make a difference. And I'm here today because, of course, you did make a difference. So, After 2015, and when we passed state legislative redistricting reform, I thought, well, clearly we're going to move on to congressional redistricting reform. It seems really obvious, if in fact our state legislature in December of 2014, in overwhelming majorities in both houses, came together and said, hey, we need to address this situation for state legislature. Why in the world wouldn't they take up congressional redistricting reform? And I think there are a lot of different reasons. There are a lot of different reasons. I think, a lot of it comes down to just simple power, right? Power. When we won in 2015, the Speaker of the U.S. House was a guy named John Boehner, right? And he really said, well, there really isn't a problem. Our Speaker of the Ohio House said, well, I'm sorry, this is like apples and oranges. They're not even comparable. And I think there was also a sense like, well, if the Republicans say they make things fairer, that means that they're going to get fewer people elected, which will make a difference not just to Ohio, but to the U.S. in general. And what will the Democrats disarm in Illinois, or is it just going to be us? So I think there were a lot of those kinds of conversations. At the end of the day, gerrymandering, 2018 today, right? But think about, gerrymandering goes back to 1812. And so for many, it's just the spoils of war. We won the elections, we get the pen, and there's a sense of history. So it's very hard to give that up. And these are the two legislators that co-sponsored the state legislative redistricting reform effort in 2014. So they were the co-sponsors. And naturally, they were the folks how many thousands of signatures have we actually collected? 100,000, right? And now we're out. Ooh, I'm going to go down to you. Oh, will I be in your way? What did you say? So we are now at 210,000. But just at the point where we hit 100,000 signatures, that was the point that the state legislature started to take some attention. They started to notice us, right? Because they were like, oh, this could go on the ballot. Oh, we better start paying attention to them. So it was October, November of 2017, so last year, they got together this legislative working group. And so the legislative working group is Matt Huffman, he's a Republican from Lima. We have Vern Sykes, who's a Democrat from Akron. They had worked together on the state legislative redistricting reform. And we also have Kirk Schuring, who's a Republican from Canton. And then we also have a Democrat, Jack Serra from Belair, which is, I hate to say this, it's all the way east, almost from here, near Cambridge. And so this group got together. And did any of you make that trip up to the State House for any of those hearings? Hello. I'm sure you have tales to tell. So after we're all done visiting, I'd encourage you to find her and ask her what her experience was like. For me, it was incredibly frustrating because it felt like a dog and pony show. Like, hey, we're going to have a hearing, and what we did is we came and we testified about why we care about gerrymandering. And, folks came and they shared their stories about collecting signatures and talking to voters, and they just listened. And it wasn't exactly clear that they were doing anything more than just listening out of politeness. We had an older gentleman, a Republican from Hilliard, which is a suburb of Columbus, he said, you can do something, but will you? You can do something, but will you? So they listened to us, and I was like, okay, we got to December, are you going to do anything? And it looked like, good heavens, they were not going to do a darn thing, right? They just went. And then when they came back in January, we had a circumstance where they started holding hearings again. And they were working off Senate Joint Resolution 5, and it was genuinely awful. I'm sure some of us have gotten those emails where you're just like, no, this is not, like, no, 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 no. And so people from all over the state came and they testified. And then inside, there were folks that actually worked with legislators to help them understand ways that they could actually improve things. And it was, how can I always put this? You know how when they say lawmaking is a little bit like making sausage? They would be right. They would be right. So it was a long process. How many of you got down to testify during this portion? One of the things that I would like to highlight about that is that folks came, they came from all over the state to share their stories because, of course, we all deserve a functioning democracy, and it's incredibly important for all of us to actually believe that when we go to the polls, that our vote counts. And not just like as a fantasy, but that it actually really does count. So, issue one's a compromise, right? It wasn't what we collected signatures for. It's a compromise. And I don't know about you, it took me a little while, even though I was there at the State House, it took me a little while to feel really good about it because we'd spent a year and some of us had come to the State House and not necessarily been treated as well as I'd like to see us all treated when we go and testify and we make that trip and we petition our government. So this was really hard. And yet, Senate Joint Resolution 5, which is now issue 1, is actually a pretty decent compromise. What it does is it says, okay, what are we most worried about? We're most worried about one political party doing the map making, right? Well, okay, let's address that with two-party map making. We're worried about things like the snake on the lake. Okay, let's focus on creating some rules so that you keep as many counties together as possible. And they identified a number. They said 65 counties together as whole. They also said, okay, well, what else do we really not like about this map-making process? What is it that just makes you so irritated? I, for one, just get livid every time I think about the fact that in 2011, they hired consultants to do the map-making. They hired consultants to do the map-making, and they put them in a hotel room that was 500 feet away from the State House, meaning they weren't even on public property. So one of the things that is good, we were able to get public records, so we know about all these things. One of the people who was the primary map maker, a woman named Heather Mann Blessing, literally went off the payroll to become a consultant to do the map making. And then to remember that they called it the bunker. They called it the bunker. How do they feel about voters? And then, there were conversations back and forth where one of the things that we know is they talked about this was about a state legislative map, not congressional. They talked about how they had created districts that were so safe for Republicans, it was going to save them in campaign cash. We also know that they moved districts around for campaign contributors. So the Timken plant, which is up near Canton, up near Akron, that direction, this is incredibly sad. There was a note, basically an email, from one of John Boehner's staff, a guy named Tom Watman, saying, hey, one of our friends would be really happy if, in fact, you would change this district. Well, one of the friends was a major donor to Jim Renacci, who's running for governor, running for U.S. Senate. And so as we think about that, moving a district for a campaign contributor, trying to put two candidates together via Lake Erie, all of the kind of shenanigans that went on behind closed doors. So what issue 1 does is it brings it out from behind closed doors, creates a more transparent process, And then it says, hey, you need to give the tools to the citizens of Ohio so that, in fact, we can draw our own maps. Now, I don't know if you remember in 2011, the whole testimony thing. They did a tour where they did a tour around the state where you could go and testify, but we were all testifying before there was a map. And it's nearly impossible to participate in an open process if, in fact, you don't have a map, right? Everything comes down to how those districts actually look. Everything comes down to, like, how does the map work? And imagine being able to actually create your own maps. Now, lots of us are not going to do that. But to know that, in fact, we could create our own maps and say, you know what? You separated two communities who share a school. You could actually do, say, if you just move the district line a little bit, you could actually create something that's more representative of community. So the other thing that as I think about issue 1 is, does anybody here feel like we live in highly polarized times? I mean, it's kind of like a joke, right, to say, do you think we live in polarized times? Because it feels incredibly polarized. The Democrats and Republicans came together to come up with a solution is a testament to them, of course, but it's a testament to the power of more than 210,000 voter signatures. That we would not be here today if it were not for many of the people in this room, many of the people all over the state who said, you know what, I care about elections, I care about what's happening to Washington. We need to do this so that we have meaningful elections. And so as we think about issue 1, this is a culmination of all of our hard work and the hard work of the League of Women Voters that goes back to the time period where I wasn't even in high school. And for many of you, you might say, well, it's not everything we wanted. We want it to be like our proposal. I can understand that. I did want to draw your attention to what Justin Levitt, who was with the Brennan Center for Justice, he wrote the Citizen's Guide to Redistricting. I bet the legal ladies actually have those available somewhere. And he actually was the head of the Civil Rights Division under Obama. Basically, it would be under Eric Holder for the Department of Justice. And now he is a professor. And one of the things he said that I thought was really powerful was that people who complain that it's not everything are the same people who said that seatbelts wouldn't save lives. And we need to think about this as a real improvement. Yes, we didn't get absolutely everything we wanted as reformers, but we got something that will rein in the worst excesses of gerrymandering. Okay, I thought it would be helpful for you all to see this. This is the ballot language. Does anyone remember the ballot language of 2012? It just went on and on and on. So this is good because it's very clear. When somebody gets to the polls, they're going to see basic information so that they're going to know that it's to end the partisan process, the way that we've traditionally done map making, make it more transparent, and also to focus on the notion that if, in fact, we can't get the job done, that the better anti-gerrymandering rules kick in. Now, I wanted to draw your attention to this. So Rich Exner is a data guy from up at Cleveland.com, the Plain Dealer. He has done some remarkable research. He had a series that looked at the impact of gerrymandering, and as part of that, he created a couple different maps to give us some ideas about what this could possibly look like. Now, the first thing you all will notice, the bad one is still way better than what we have, where counties, as much as possible, are kept whole. The difference between these two maps is that, in fact, there are 4 competitive districts rather than 1 or possibly 2 competitive districts in this one. And I think it's important to realize, you know, we can do what we can to rein in the worst excesses of gerrymandering, but whether we get something that really focuses on really competitive elections, or we get, you know, a map that doesn't completely marginalize one political party and keeps communities whole, it is significantly better than what we have right now. And you might say to yourself, okay, so this is enormous. This area is really, you know, it's incredibly large. That has to do with population. That each of these are equal in population. I think they're off just a little bit, but they're equal in population so that you have a sense that, hey, this is a community of southeastern Ohio is way different than you think about that, what would be like almost a banana shape that they have. It's, you know, we really, I think it's helpful to have a chance to actually see these maps. His name is Rich Exner, and if you put Rich Exner and good maps, that's what I put in my Google search engine to find this. Okay, so how does it work? These are people who are our legislators, and they are accustomed to not getting along, right? They're accustomed to like coming together, trying to work things out, and things not working out, and then they say, okay, what's the next thing we can do? What's the next thing we can do? What's the next thing we can do? So our legislators are worried about not being able to come to a compromise or an agreement. And so they set this up in a way that like we would not think to do it, right? We wouldn't necessarily think, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that. So what they said, okay, how do we get to bipartisan map making? Well, we will start with, we don't want to take it away from ourselves. Remember, it's all about power. They don't want to give that up. So, all right, how do we do this? We say that, in fact, we will have a supermajority in both houses with 50% of both political parties do the map making. What's the likelihood that a supermajority with 50% of both political parties will come up with an agreement? Well, that's pretty small. So why don't we give it to the Ohio Redistricting Commission, right? Why don't we do that? The voters passed that in 2015. We know they like it. It's bipartisan. We'll give it to them. Okay, so like if that doesn't work, what we're going to do is we're in fact going to say, all right, you can't come up with an agreement. You, in fact, can have one-party map making, but you have extremely tight rules. And the rules are this. Basically, you have to keep all counties whole as much as possible. Now, obviously, you're going to do some division because of population. It has to be a transparent process, once again, clearly. The other thing that is important is they have to do a written justification for why they did the district lines, with a rule that says you cannot draw these district lines to favor or disfavor one political party or incumbent over another. And this becomes important because the courts have said that favoring an incumbent is actually, you can actually do this. And so the Republicans, if they're in power, or the Democrats, if they're in power, would come down to having much tighter rules that focus on compactness, that focus on drawing the lines to favor or disfavor one political party, and then they have to explain why they did it. And the benefit of that is, of course, it's way easier to sue them or call them out if it makes absolutely no sense. And that is the benefit there. And I think as we think about the kind of those anti-gerrymandering rules, they are strong. And the other thing to remember is no one actually wants a 4-year map. And so that will also encourage them to actually get along and do bipartisan map making. Okay, so once again, I wanted to highlight, the power of us, the power of us talking to voters about redistricting reform, the power of walking people through what gerrymandering is and why we should care about something that happens every 10 years. I included this slide just because I thought it was kind of fun to think about. We did this event at the Arnold Sports Festival, And Arnold Schwarzenegger arranged for us to be there to hand out information about issue 1. And he stopped by the booth and he said, "Healthy bodies, healthy democracy." And so we had a wonderful time talking to all sorts of people who might not ever have heard about gerrymandering. And they were very pleased that Arnold was in town. While he was in town, he did a toast with schnapps with the legislators who worked to pass this and to our governor, which was kind of fun to watch them have a little bit of toast. In fact, one of them just had just the teeniest, and I was like, clearly not a drinker. And this picture here, this is Tiffany. Tiffany lives in my neck of the woods. She actually lives right near me. And it was really, really, really cold when it came time to actually go out there and talk to voters on St. Patrick's Day. And, you know, we did. We went out, we did it. It was cold. And I have to say, I've been so impressed with how engaged and committed folks are. And then finally, I thought you all might want to know where to kind of get some information. So we're fairdistrict.ohio.org. That's where you can find information about issue 1. We also are on Facebook, so, you know, when we do the Twitter thing. And then, of course, you can always give us a phone call. Now, my guess is many of you have lots of questions, so I'm actually going to hand it back to the nice moderator as long as you're ready for that.
And we will ask questions for about 5 minutes until 7 when we take a moment of silence for Dr. King.
Hi, I'm Joan Gilmore. Just raise your hand if you have a question. I'll bring the mic up. I have read the details of both issue 1 and the petition. And I think that the petition is much more democratic than what's in issue 1. And I was wondering why we are continuing to push for the petition to be voted on in November, where there are strict requirements, rather than in the issue 1 where it's just maybe we'll make them feel good, or they'll be worried if we don't.
So that's a really good question. Issue 1 does its best to mitigate the worst excesses of gerrymandering, but through bipartisan mapmaking, greater transparency, and through citizen participation in the mapmaking. So it reins in kind of the worst excesses. It is not as good as our proposal. It is not, but it does get at the worst excesses. And the thing to remember about redistricting reform is that we've lost. We lost in 1981 when we did a citizens initiative. We lost in 2005 when we did a citizens initiative, and we lost in 2012. We were successful in 2015 with a bipartisan approach. And that's, you know, it's not surprising to say that in fact, a bipartisan approach where, you know, we all give a little and we all let go of some of the things that we want. The party in power has given up a lot of their power by having us mitigate the worst excesses of gerrymandering. And we're not getting exactly what we want either. And I also have difficulty letting that go and envision us working to continue to improve redistricting in the future. I think when we go through the 2021 map making, when we see what actually happens, I think we're going to need to do a lot of work to actually get people to participate and do maps. And there are things that we're going to need to do to hold these folks accountable. If this is not successful, we keep at it. And in the meantime, we've led and participated in bipartisan efforts to come up with a solution. And there is something meaningful as we go into a primary where both political parties and the people who show up at a primary are the people who are, shall we say, the most partisan. So it was clear really from the very beginning that our legislators were going to put this on in May. And the goal here was to come up with a proposal that mitigates the worst excesses of gerrymandering. It's not an easy solution to say, hey, let's compromise. But there is a real beauty in, it's an incredibly polarized time. Folks came together left and right to support this. That the AFL-CIO and the Chamber of Commerce could come together and say, hey, let's get this done, is powerful. And I understand how hard it is to let go. And I actually encourage us to continue collecting those signatures as insurance so that it encourages folks from all of the different teams that are working on redistricting reform to actually spend a lot of energy educating voters.
I have a question. I was looking for the language on the table out there. I saw the language for issue 2 and issue 3, and I didn't see the language for issue 1. Did I just miss it?
So no, you didn't. So as you might imagine, Common Cause has a more limited budget, and so basically what we have out there is where you can find it. It's on a green flyer. So if you go to fairdistrict.ohio.org, it's on the green flyer. There's a tab that says issue 1, and you can get everything from the ballot language, there's some videos, and you can actually get the specific language that is was Senate Joint Resolution 5, which is issue 1. So what my friends from the league are saying is the Hamilton County Board of Elections also has the available Secretary of State's office. If you go to myohiovote.com, you can also find it there.
So is it my imagination, or did we have the language for issue 2 and the issue 3 on the table?
I don't know. I travel from Columbus, so I don't know.
Yeah, we've done write-ups on issue 2 and issue 3. The league puts out that neat newsprint voter guide in the fall. We don't do that for primary elections, but there's so much interest in this primary election. We did do write-ups on the 2 levies in Hamilton County, which are issue 2 and issue 3 that are out there and are quite comprehensive. There's a lot of material on issue 1 out there. I do have one copy that I pulled off the Hamilton County Board of Elections site that does have the language for issue 1 that you would see on the ballot. Otherwise, you need to do it. We also have copies of voter registration material. And remember, it's not just registration, it's updating your registration if you've moved. It's really important to keep that up to date, and it's very easy to do so. You can do it online, and we have the forms here to fill in. But if you want to vote in this election, you have to get them to the Board of Elections by the 9th, which is next week, April 9th. And we also have requests out there, forms, if you want to vote by mail, where you can send that to the Board of Elections. And remember, this is a primary election, so when you go in to vote, you'll be asked, do you want a Democrat or a Republican ballot? Because you would vote for one or the other. It is possible for independents to go in and say, neither. I would like an issues-only ballot, which will be a nice, really short ballot in Hamilton County. You'll have 3 issues on it, and you can vote it very quickly. But mostly, as Catherine says, you end up with the real partisan people coming. And so hopefully you can talk to folks about gerrymandering in this issue and say, come on out and just vote for that, if that's, because it is an important thing to do.
I recognize that this is a bipartisan, negotiated sort of proposal. I guess the question I had was, are there other states who have similar or somewhat comparable type redistricting, either proposals or laws on their books?
So one of the things that I should say is that Ohio is, we're actually ahead of the curve when it comes to redistricting reform. That in fact, okay, so you have Arizona that has an independent commission, you have California has an independent commission, you have Iowa that gives it basically to their legislative service commission to do the map making. Basically, they give it to the folks who work for them. But sadly, it's been very hard to move redistricting reform. It is somewhat similar to New Jersey's. New Jersey has this thing that's kind of interesting where the Democrat, like basically they flip a coin and the Democrats will present a map and then the Republicans will submit a map and they try to have a conversation between the two different maps. So it's a little like map making via arm wrestling. So they don't have kind of the transparency and some of the more citizen participation things that ours includes, and they also don't have some of the rules that focus on keeping counties whole. So they don't have some of those kinds of rules to kind of rein in. You know, if you actually have bigger building blocks, it's harder to mess around with the map, right? So that if you have to get, so they do not actually have that. But it's an interesting model to look at because one of the things that we know from how that has gone is that they have been able to engage in a kind of dialogue that is not great, but it's way better than just having one party do the map making.
All right, thank you. If you have any further questions, please see Ms. Tershler or Mr. Richard Asmus after the program. I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. And as stated before, we have additional information at the tables outside. Remember, as stated, that the deadline for early registration is April 9th, and the elections, early voting starts on Tuesday. You can either send in an absentee ballot or go to the Board of Elections in Norwood to early vote in person. Election day is May 8th. So let's get out and vote. Let our voices be heard. Thank you.